Hey guys, I'm AnandTech from AnandTech.com. I'm here with the ever awesome Brian Klug. We are live from Barcelona. This is Mobile World Congress 2014. We're at the Intel booth. Thank you guys for helping us out with this. And this is the AnandTech Mobile Show. So we've been here for 3-ish days now, and it's just been like an insane 3 days. We just finished up Galaxy S5 last night.
Yep.
We posted,
not a lot of sleep.
No, not. It was like, for me, it was 4 hours of sleep over 2 days. I didn't sleep on the flight over here, and we were out doing, I don't even remember what we were doing.
Yeah,
it was just like nonstop meetings and press conferences.
But it's a good sort of burn.
It is. Yeah. It is a very good sort of burn. So we got a lot of what we want to talk about. I want to start. I definitely want to talk about Galaxy S5 because we spent just a ton of time on that.
At the show and.
Absolutely, but I want to start talking about some of the releases. And one of the things that was, we were actually off camera, we were just talking about how this all unfolded. So Ryan Smith, our senior GPU editor, he was working on the Maxwell review, and then we get the most amazing email in the world from Imagination Technologies, and it's like, hey, the backstory here is you need to understand all of the mobile IP vendors for the past 4 years, we meet with them.
Right.
They're not used to disclosing anything, and we meet with them and we want them to disclose the level of information that we get from Intel, NVIDIA, AMD. We want deep dives on all their architecture so we can talk about it intelligently.
Yes.
And literally this freaks all of them out, right? Like their response is like, no, that's never going to happen, or we see no reason to do that. And having lived through doing this in the PC side like almost 20 years ago, I've heard all of these answers before, and I know at the end of the day they're going to...
Or the favorite is the competitor will respin in 6 months and then somehow beat them.
Yeah, and that's always like a go-to argument is either, hey, we don't want people talking about specs and we want people focused on user experience, or we don't want to disclose so much that our competitors are just going to improve their products as a result. Both are a farce. Right?
Yeah, it's never going to happen in the 6-month product window.
Exactly. Both are a farce, but it's just far more convenient to kind of do that, right? So Ryan's working on the Maxwell review. We get this email from Imagination Technologies that's like, basically, hey, we know you've been asking for a deep dive on our architectures. We're ready to tell you anything you want to know about Series 6 and Series 6 XT. Are you interested? And I told Ryan he was in the middle of that. There was another NDA he was working on, and I was like, look, I know you're really busy. I'll help with whatever I can, but we have to do this. And to his credit, he pulled it off, right? We published the first deep dive. Now, it's not as comprehensive as I would like. There's still some areas of the GPU that we don't know. But we understand the fundamental core of Imagination's latest GPUs, which I thought was really cool.
It's a step in the right direction that we really don't have from anybody except for NVIDIA.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so very clear that the reason we got this is because of the amount of just PR that NVIDIA got.
192 cores, man.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because, Imagination, the GX 6650, it's a Series 6 XT part. It's a part that likely will end up in something iPad-like, maybe.
Maybe.
It sounds very much like, the thing that you would include in something like that. And it also, if you count similarly to NVIDIA, it's also a 192 core part. But if you look at all the...
parity is interesting.
Yes. But if you look at all the press that NVIDIA got versus the relatively little amount of press that Imagination got on, definitely a competing part, I totally get the motivation.
Yes.
So a couple of things that I was surprised by was just the incredible amount of texture and pixel fill rate that design has. Even Ryan was caught off guard by it.
Yeah. He seemed caught off guard by the FP16 stuff as well.
Yeah, so the FP16. So what's really interesting is if you look at the PC side of GPUs, we transitioned away from partial precision, years ago, right? Everything is FP32, and now you have some like partial rate FP64 for people doing compute or what have you. But in mobile,
still a lot of FP16 apparently.
Yeah, and well, because it makes sense, right? Like its power is very, very important. And we're now getting at the point where people are talking about doing compute on these devices.
Yes.
But for the most part, you're rendering, you're playing Flappy Bird, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't need FP32 there. You don't need that level of precision. And if you so in PCs, typically the way you do it is you have an FP32 unit, right? So a 32-bit wide unit. And if you want to send FP16 data through it, that's fine. You only just switch the lower half of the bits, right? It's not necessarily the most power efficient way of doing it, right? If you have dedicated FP16 units, they can be more efficient for FP16 workloads, and I think he was
turn on the bigger ones.
Exactly, and he was very surprised by the fact that these flagship GPU architectures from Imagination have dedicated FP16 units in addition to FP32.
Right.
But I don't know. I would encourage you to read the article. I think it's a great take and great explanation on not only just how GPUs work, but also gives you a lot of insight into imagination and their GPUs. Was there anything else that you were surprised by?
I think it's interesting that we called out all the GPU manufacturers, and it would be great to get the same thing from all of them.
Yeah.
Whether or not that will ever happen is another thing, but...
I think it's absolutely, I think the absolute next step is, you've got, Adreno's next on the list, right? It has to happen at this point.
Yeah. I'd love it, but obviously the other players are just so closed, and there's a lot of obfuscation, more so than really anybody gets visibility into.
Yes. And I think ARM has done a good job. Like with the Mali, they've given out quite a bit already, and I suspect that it'll be.
Yeah, they're close. That's a good point. Yeah, sure. ARM deserves kudos.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's exciting. But yeah, that's a really good point. We called out all of the GPU makers.
But it's like exactly the thing that we didn't like the most was the escalating core count war, and
yes.
I loved Ryan's use of the phrase creative accounting.
Yes.
Because that's absolutely the case, is that there's just been creative accounting for so long now. Starting with, like the X8 and even, the way Qualcomm numbers cores even, but especially NVIDIA as well.
Yeah.
And everybody's kind of got caught up in this escalating war.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess finally the fruits of that are this disclosure.
Yes.
Which is just ironic to me because we've been fighting for it for, years. Like
yeah,
every
literally
MWC,
years.
We ask for it and then, maybe we'll tell you eventually, or, indefinite NDA.
Yeah.
Right?
So you bring up an interesting point. You talk about escalating core counts. Earlier this week.
Yeah.
So earlier this week. So at the end of last year, Qualcomm announced the Snapdragon 410, which is a vanilla ARM IP-based SoC. It's a quad-core ARM Cortex-A53. So that's a two-wide in-order microprocessor. And ARM views it as kind of the most you can get without going out of order. And it's always really interesting to me in that everyone tries to prolong the amount of time before they fall off that out-of-order cliff.
Right.
In mobile, because you need to go out of order to get that hefty performance increase and really enable the next wave of growth.
But any speculative execution is burning a power budget.
Yeah, it's just burning through your power budget. So, but A53 exists, and Qualcomm leveraged it. You have this quad-core A53 part, and that's not unusual for Qualcomm, right? Like they've done vanilla ARM IP stuff for the lower-end markets where
they've done it for a long time, and I think the issue has always been, there's not as much visibility into mid and low.
Yes.
I'll just be honest. And you even see this in the comments. It's like, why do you only care about the flagship?
Yeah.
And obviously the flagship, I would say, is the most important. But, mid and lower where increasingly the volume is in a saturated
and they're becoming better, right? So Moto G,
Yeah.
I thought, was a great example of something that, to me,
but
that
like
is,
A5s, like Qualcomm used A5s even
Yeah.
before A7s. But that's like a surprise to people, or...
Well, so so the first thing is, it's not unusual for this to happen.
Sure.
Those lower end, or not lower end, but things that don't cost $600,
yeah.
right? Those performance
Mass market.
mainstream, mass market, low end value, all of those segments and phones, those are going to become really, really important over the next couple of years here. I've been, this entire process, we've been going down and kind of explaining it through the guise of, this is what happened in the PC industry.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're at the cusp of, if you remember when PCs started shipping below $1,000, right? I remember
Sure.
sitting at IDF and Intel talking about the first $600 PC.
Yes.
And it was unfathomable to me that would even happen.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're on the cusp of that in phones, where, these...
Well, it's when LTE goes mass market,
Yes.
essentially. Which is, you can make the case right now, or
or very soon.
8926, 8928.
Absolutely. So obviously these areas start becoming more important. They announced the 410, quad-core A53, leveraged Adreno graphics. The interesting thing is now we have a 600 series part that also leverages A53s. Right? So they announced the 610 and 615. 610 takes 4 Cortex A53s and pairs it with an Adreno 405. So that's their DX11 class GPU.
Yes.
615 is the unique one because it takes 8 Cortex A53s, right? And they are... they're 2 clusters of 4. The lower end cluster is optimized for low power, lower frequency. The upper end cluster is optimized for higher power, higher performance, higher frequency. So in some cases, it's kind of like NVIDIA's 4+1, but it's across 8.
Yeah.
And you can have all 8.
It's almost like a big little.
It's almost like a big little.
Smaller. No, I guess it would be like medium, smaller.
Or just like little.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
because they're the same core size, but you're toggling the frequency knob, right? So what's interesting is you can have all 8 operational at the same time. They're not talking frequencies, but my guess is the low power cores, you're talking 1.4, 1.2, somewhere in that range, and then maybe the high performance ones 1.5-ish, because this is all 28 nanometer LP. So you still have Adreno 405 on the graphics side, but this plays into...
So ACPUclock.c is going to be very interesting
yeah.
to look at, and how they elect to light up cores and in what order.
Well, because that's the thing. Like, I don't know of any consumer workloads that are going to... I mean, even on the desktop, 8 cores is like 8 threads is a lot, which is why I think they did this, low and high power cluster approach. You can use all 8 if you'd like, and I don't doubt that there'll be some situations where maybe you light up 5, 6, right?
Sure.
But I think the real value there is when you need performance, you have 4 higher clocked, and when you don't need as much performance, you have 4 lower clocked.
Yeah, or they're different areas too, perhaps. I mean, they've been optimized differently.
Absolutely.
But I mean, it's just a blatant admission that in China you can't sell something without the 8-core, thing on the box, essentially.
And that's it's not my job to sell silicon globally. So like I think from our perspective we can be really utopian about it.
But it's always been that way. Like even they had a quad A5 and it was like, does a quad A5 make sense?
Yeah.
8225Q. And then, obviously we had a lot of A7s in some MediaTek parts, right?
Yeah.
So it's just the writing on the wall for like what can you really sell?
Yeah.
In what market? I mean, it's something that'll never come to the United States, or at least I doubt it.
Well, I don't know. Like I feel like it can definitely come to the U.S. Because A53s are pretty small.
Sure.
And you can
but
still
I mean,
leverage.
Like you don't need 8 cores to sell a phone here.
Correct. Yeah, it's not a necessary requirement. But just like what we were talking about earlier, that core count race. Like it kind of started with NVIDIA, but it is now completely taken over. Like it's so even Intel ran into it, right? Like if you look at Merrifield,
that's exactly what I was going to say. Well, you can't sell a 2-core and a 4-core world.
Yeah, and
it's going to be hard to sell a 4-core and an 8-core world.
Well, so it's kind of crazy to me because I look at Merrifield. So Merrifield is the phone counterpart to Bay Trail, which is what we got last year. The big difference here is that it actually uses imagination graphics. So Series 6, the G6400. So it's actually the same core count as what's in the iPhone 5S and iPad Air, but there's some slight differences in optimization. So I look at that, and those are high IPC cores, right?
Yeah.
All I want is 2 of those cores.
Right.
I don't actually need more. And whenever I go into these meetings, and you have OEMs saying, well, hey, it's not 4 cores.
Well, I mean, to be fair, you have 4 cores in Bay Trail versus 2 in other devices, and it's already, there's a performance penalty there.
Yeah, but the thing is that performance penalty is like entirely, it's IPC. It's not threading.
Yes.
Right?
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, going to 2 in the phone part, that's the tenuous decision that we have to stick with now.
I think it absolutely is the right direction. But the other announcement that came out is Moorefield, which is the quad-core follow-on to this.
Yes.
And I feel like I just hate that a lot of these companies are unfortunately like they're forced because of some markets to kind of to play that game. I think they're both interesting, and I would definitely like a quad-core Moorefield part. But I think Merrifield, I don't know. I mean, we saw the numbers that came out. It's very competitive performance-wise. I'm really interested in power because this is their first 22
That's the thing,
SoC.
though. It's like it's competitive. It's competitive in a sense that, those numbers exist now, but there's no devices, right? But so it's really, you have to look, 6 to 12 months. Where is that going to be when, like the BSP is finished?
Yes.
When devices are actually shipping?
Yes.
And that's the very tenuous,
well,
cycle.
But I think what's interesting is when Intel brought out Merrifield. Like if you look at Medfield, if you look at all of Intel's prior, attempts in the phone space, they've always come out and said, "Hey, we're targeting the high end." But if you look at the messaging around Merrifield, it's performance and mainstream.
I would say,
And I think that's really powerful, right? So one thing, we see the struggle that everyone kind of had to react and do 64-bit, but if you're shipping x86, you paid that penalty years ago, right? So you can flip a switch. We're all 64-bit. Now we're just waiting on Google. And if Merrifield class performance is the new mainstream, like that's pretty good.
Sure.
Right? Like it's not, I would still love to see
That's the thing though, the timing, I think the thing to keep in mind has always been, there's never been a real criticism with, like Intel's parts are this, like an order of magnitude slower.
Yeah.
They're great now, but when I finally get the device,
Yeah,
6 months down the road.
The issue has always been design wins and the cadence of the design wins.
Right.
But I think that's been more of an issue because we were always viewing it like this needs to be the next great high-end.
Yes.
But I think as Merrifield is positioned as this is kind of for the masses and for the bigger part of... I mean, it's kind of like AMD's sweet spot strategy in graphics from a couple years back, right? Where, you know, the rest of the world is focused on, you know, these kind of $600 GPUs, and AMD said, no, we're going to focus at $199 and $299.
Yeah. The question is whether they're willing to take the sort of margin that you really have to at the mid-range. Like, that's not where you can get away selling a $30, $40 SoC.
So it's, I don't know, like I look at Merrifield and to me it's the type of thing where if it were available today in like an Nexus 5 or a Moto X or
I mean, that's always been the case.
Yeah.
I would say that's absolutely the case. Is like, and the same was the same was the case for, you know, the predecessors as well.
Medfield and Clover Trail
Medfield
Plus.
or Penwell.
What's interesting is
SoC.
we're seeing a lot of Clover Trail Plus use in China. Or even Asus announced like a whole family of phones, like really cheap. The most expensive one was like $200.
Sure.
And they're all based on...
And I have the phone pad too.
Yeah, exactly. And they're all based on, you know, kind of N-1 Intel mobile silicon. I don't know. I feel like that market becomes very interesting, especially if we're talking about like A53 class performance versus, you know, what was effectively going to be best of Intel. Right? If that's the sort of comparison that we're going to start doing at those lower price points, that can make things very interesting. But like you said, we just need it in a design, right? It needs to be.
Yeah, and that's always been the case. And I don't know what the problem is there, but that's the case for NVIDIA as well, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of players that kind of they have something that's great. They need to make it that last 20%, you know, 30%. Have the engineering support in place.
Yeah.
You know, like obviously QRDs. Everybody has a reference design. MediaTek does the same thing.
Yeah.
Where they essentially deliver, like, here's a bill of materials. Some of them are even dual sourced, right? Yes. Put them together, put them in a box, because really the OEMs are parts assemblers to begin with. So
we just offended like every device maker.
Well, I mean, they are. I mean, it's tacit admission that a lot of them need you know, they need something that here the software tree works. Here's all the drivers. Here's all the HALs.
Yeah.
You know,
and you guys focus on ID and all that.
So what do you think about this? It's not. Yeah, I'm not being offensive. It's leverage what you're good at.
Yeah. Like, so what do you think about this? I've been arguing for. You know, we see a lot of these form factor reference designs. You know, Intel's, Qualcomm's, the QRD program. I kind of want to see that.
MediaTek, even Broadcom have them now.
Yeah. So I kind of want to see that top to bottom. Like I want a high-end reference platform, a mainstream, a value.
Well, I think that the high-end gets a lot of focus from the OEMs to begin with.
Yeah. But no one builds a reference platform for the high-end, right? Because they say that people want to differentiate.
You don't need to, right?
Yeah,
now.
but I want that, right? I want that same level of validation, top to bottom.
Well, so it's done. It's just nobody productizes a device like that because we're at a point now where it used to be whatever device is best kind of just has the best silicon, right? I mean, that was always my thing, is like, what device has the best silicon? Because oftentimes that'll have, you know, like we've shown, a big impact on what is the overall performance of the device and the end user experience.
Yeah.
But now it's like, you know, it's just a matter of going out and buying it. And anybody can go out and buy it. The thing that makes the device, you know, like favorable one versus the other is everything around the edges.
Yes.
Like camera, speakers, obviously even industrial design.
And display, obviously.
Yeah. So it's really everything that's around the edge. And, you know, at the high end, they don't need all of this done for them because they're going to go out and cherry pick whatever they want.
But do you not think that, you know, all the stuff around the edges, do you not think that at some point we'll hit the kind of optimal, right? Like,
sure. I mean, we're rapidly converging on whatever that is.
Like the optimal display option, the optimal camera option. Yeah. And when you get to that point, differentiation, for the sake of differentiation, will actually be a negative thing?
Well, then it's a commoditized market.
Yeah.
It's a completely commoditized market at that point.
So the other thing I want to talk about is obviously, you know, last year at MWC, Intel had the big modem push, but this year we have silicon, right?
Yes.
Like that's in. And you know, there was even the rumor that one of the versions of the Galaxy S5 is going to leverage, you know, XMM 7260, and this is all stuff that
7160, I'm sure.
Yo, you think it'll be 71? Yeah,
I
right.
know it's too early for 7260.
That's true. So 7160 and 7260, you went a roll this last year.
That's what I mean. It's ironic to me because none of it was news.
Yeah.
From my point of view, because
But
we
most
essentially
people aren't
disclosed.
exposed to like.
Well, I mean, we published about it. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say all the 7260 details we had in August of last year.
Yeah, because that's when Intel did their kind of modem workshop.
Yeah. But
Any
I mean, I guess
thoughts
now
on-
we have silicon that wasn't, sort of engineering sample level.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one of those, like I want to wait and see. I want to see power numbers. I want to see,
Yeah.
device wins. I want to see the industry validation. I think this is the year when, LTE gets commoditized. Like,
Interesting.
Qualcomm loses #1 status
Well, no,
exclusive status.
Yes. Yeah, because they're at like a 90+% market share right now, right? Like
Yeah,
it's-
and already depending on what operator you're on and what the operator is certified, it's already possible to ship LTE only SKUs.
Yeah.
You have players who don't have to pay the 3G tax essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
No one ships
the-
LTE only in the U.S. though right now.
Yes, no. People
Really?
are shipping LTE only in the US
What's
right now.
do you know of what's an example?
We've covered that news at CES.
No, but what's an example of a device that's shipping today that's LTE only?
There was a Galaxy camera, and then there's there's a tablet.
But nothing on the phone side.
No, phone stuff you still need voice.
Yeah.
But that's coming, I would say, in 2014.
So you think
VoLTE
2014
voice.
we'll see LTE voice, but will you see LTE voice with no other options?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
really
Mhm.
in 2014?
VoLTE. Yeah. Late 2014, maybe
Interesting.
2015.
And likely
Again,
Verizon
it's-
SKUs?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Verizon's the main player. They want to get rid of 3G.
Yeah.
I mean, and they need to. But yes, I mean, and the LTE patent pool is more spread out, so
Yeah.
it becomes, you need to pay less of a tax essentially.
Yeah.
And you'll see Broadcom, you'll see even Nvidia, you'll see obviously Intel. I mean, go down the laundry list of who has. I mean, MediaTek has LTE too.
Yeah, that's true.
So everybody will have it, and that's the key differentiator I think for this year will be like
and that'll
it goes
likely
mainstream.
that'll also help kind of drive smartphone ASPs down.
Exactly. Yeah. Very much so.
So obviously the big news, Galaxy S5. We were at the announcement last night. We got to play around with the thing
Yeah.
for like a really long time.
I was so tired. We stood it. Yeah. It's you don't want to cover that part of the event, but it does factor into like how awake you are when you
Yes.
finally get to touch whatever it is.
Well, because you got in line at the venue at 6 p.m.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Doors open at 6:30. Yeah.
Doors open at 6:30, and like there's just this. You always
And then it's
describe
like
it.
8. 8
Yeah.
is when it starts.
And you
Yeah.
just always describe it as like an amorphous blob of people.
I've yet to be in an event where there's like an orderly line.
Yeah, no,
There's
it's
never an orderly line. Like,
It's
so if you want to play with the whatever, you have to play that game.
Yeah. So we played the game. I thought their presentation was definitely more polished and mature than any of the previous launches.
Sure.
Right? Like they were a lot more focused. There was a lot less. I mean, there was no spectacle, right? It was just.
Except for the orchestra. You were like
Yeah, there was the orchestra.
But the orchestra was least tasteful.
Yes, it was tastefully done, and everything else was. I don't know. I thought it was definitely a grown-up Samsung. So they
Sure.
announced the device. The device is a 5.1-inch 1080p Super AMOLED still. So roughly similar display size to
Yes.
Galaxy S4. They only announced, at least at the event, they announced the Snapdragon 801 implementation. So MSM
Yeah.
8974AC. It's up to 2.5 gigahertz on the CPU.
Everything everybody said it would be.
Exactly.
I mean, you could have guessed the specs. I mean, and we did.
Yeah, but well now, so everyone, initially there was some kind of divergent theories, right? People thought they were going to do a 1440p display. They thought they were going to do...
Well, I mean, it's something that has yet to be seen.
Yes.
This was episode 1, which I thought was the most telling part of the whole.
Absolutely. Like
event.
you called that out. I actually didn't even notice it. If you look at the title of the event, it's Samsung Impact 2014, episode 1,
Yeah.
which, I mean...
Can't wait for episode 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah,
Like-
exactly. So what we got was very much like a polished evolution of Galaxy S4. So it's still a polycarbonate design. I thought, so it's actually a little thicker and a little heavier than the previous gen.
Which is kind of incredible on its own that,
It
that
is,
they were
but
willing to regress on those.
But so to me, it didn't actually feel... I preferred the way it felt to the Galaxy S4.
See, I can never, I don't do hands-on feel impressions when it's cabled up. Like
That's
it's
true.
there. I don't think anybody can honestly give
But
me an
the
honest
texture of
assessment.
it, you can at least feel the texture of it, right? Did you not
Yeah,
feel like it's an improvement over...
I feel like they hyped it up like this would be a completely different industrial design,
Yeah.
right? which
Now,
or
do
at
you
least
believe
that
they
was the
hyped it up,
messaging.
or
Well,
the press
so
hyped it up?
I will say this. I will say it's fascinating to me that Samsung is kind of in the same position as Apple now, where
Yes.
expectations wildly outrank what ends up shipping.
Oh, absolutely.
So you need to do expectation management. That's the reality.
Yeah.
And everybody does it. But I think Samsung in this case, didn't really set it the right way. They set a focus that would return to focus on fundamentals.
Yeah.
It would sort of like, it would be tasteful in a different sort of way.
Yeah.
And so I think it shocked people when they saw that, like, hey, it looks the same. But it shouldn't shock people who are savvy and in this business.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, it's a brand. Like, that's the...
And I think that was the most telling thing for me, that they clearly have a platform and a product now that sells incredibly well. And the last thing you want to do when you're in that space is just throw it all away and try and do something totally different.
They converged on a solution, so it's not surprising to see. But
so
I guess it's still shocking to me that it regressed in thickness. I will say that having a textured back is a lot better than the hyperglaze.
Yes.
I don't know that it
saying, to me,
necessarily solves anything of what people were complaining about. Like, that's one of the axes.
Yes.
But it's not the fundamental axis. I think for whatever reason now the back material, specifically the battery door.
Yeah.
I guess the back cover has become sort of the primary focal point of all industrial design criticism.
Yes.
Whereas when the reality is that there are other things like the chrome ring that it sort of screams.
But it's very clear that like HTC focuses on a lot of that stuff, right? If you look at how they brought the One to market and the One X, right?
Yeah.
They were very, very focused on that little tiny strip at the top and the tiny strip at the bottom, because you walk into a store and that's what you're exposed to, right?
Sure.
You're never exposed to the back. But I think
the
that's
tiny strip being the antennas.
Yeah, like the speaker grill up top, the speaker grill down bottom, or the grill down bottom.
At least they have an overall story. It's like the only big delta here is like the back cover material is different, right?
So
the reality is that there are other things that
were
you
you
need to
neutral
change.
or negative on the changes ID wise?
I'm fine with the changes ID wise. Yeah, I don't want to sound negative about it because there's nothing to be negative about it. It is what it is.
Yeah, no, and actually,
and it's not, nor is it surprising, right?
Yes.
Like it should surprise nobody.
Correct.
But, the device itself, 8974AC was a known entity. It was obvious they were going to go that way. Camera is interesting. I think the phase detection pixels are.
So explain that to me. I didn't actually. So they obviously they introduced this.
Yeah, like there's Aptina sensors and there's a Nikon camera that have phase detection AF.
So what happens with phase detection AF? How is that different? So normally when you autofocus, you look at contrast differences, right? And that's how you determine that there's something in the scene.
Yes.
Now, what do you do with and they have that AF mode.
Yeah, but
they
different type
also
of pixel that essentially gives you, like when you've converged to focus.
Interesting. So it's a different type of pixel that essentially senses, instead of for color, senses for focus?
Yes, yeah.
Really?
Essentially.
Huh, and do you know how that works?
I don't know whether Samsung is using the same one as Aptina, so I don't want to say.
Well, so how does Aptina do it?
I don't fully understand all of necessarily how it works.
Yeah.
But there are various tricks you can play with when things are finally in focus, stuff will cancel out.
Interesting.
Or you look at,
so the
you have a thing that maybe gets aligned or.
And so the implication here from the AF, from what they said, was that they do both in tandem, or they choose opportunistically.
Yeah, I'm not. Again, I've seen the device once, right? And they're never going to tell you.
Yeah.
Ever.
Well, and they promised industry-leading AF speed, like 0.3 seconds. We played with the devices. Do you agree with that? Is it fast on the focusing?
I guess so. Yeah. I will say that the stabilization thing was kind of annoying.
What do you mean? What does it do stabilization-wise?
When you click the camera, you click capture, and then it sort of waits for you to stabilize, and then it takes the picture.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in when I click capture, like it better capture.
Yeah, exactly.
So I turned that off. But I think the bigger things are, obviously they're using their own sensor this time.
Yes.
And
it's a 16:9 sensor.
Yes, and that was my second one, that it's a 16:9 sensor.
And bigger pixels than last gen, right?
No, it's not bigger pixels.
Oh, bigger sensor.
It's a bigger sensor. It's still 1.1 micron.
Gotcha.
And using their ISOCELL thing. So like, in years past, it's always been they use a Sony sensor.
Yes.
I think it's interesting this time around they want to finally use one of their own sensors on their flagship. And, it's 16:9 is curious because I don't know why. it seems to be a popular thing right now to leverage that just so that the preview is 16:9.
Yes. Well, but that's preferable to you have a fake preview or like a viewfinder that's useless.
Yeah, sure, but I mean, it's like I solved the problem by literally just chopping off the pixels this time, right?
So you
like
would
the image is still a circle.
Yeah.
Now I just have a sensor that's like kind of a weird aspect ratio.
That's
in the middle of it.
That's true.
So that part doesn't make any sense. But I mean, whatever. It is what it is. Like, I'm not going to argue that it's bad, but it's interesting because you've seen HTC do that.
Yep.
Now Samsung does it. You can make the case Nokia has always had it.
Yeah. And then they also have 2x2 MIMO 802.11ac.
But yeah, the combo that Broadcom literally announced the same day.
Yeah. And they also introduced like kind of this interesting
like 866 megabits now.
Yeah, and they introduced this interesting feature called Download Booster.
Yes.
Right, so it basically lets you shotgun and download across Wi-Fi and LTE at the same time.
Right.
And you actually,
which is kind of cool. Yeah, I mean, it works.
Right?
It works.
So you toggled Wi-Fi only, LTE only, and in both cases you were talking 10, 20-ish megabits.
Yes.
You just speed tested, of course, Brian, he speed tested it. You enabled Download Booster and you were getting 40 plus megabit.
Right.
So it actually worked.
Oh yeah, it definitely works. I'm sure that's going to be a thing operators will love.
Yeah.
You can use up your mobile data while you're on Wi-Fi. So.
And it's also a dangerous thing for if you don't know what's going on to just like leave it on all the time.
Yeah, but I mean, it does work in those cases where you really want to get something fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or it's essentially like carrier aggregation, but like Wi-Fi and LTE.
Yeah, across different radios. So I think that is true. Thinking outside of the box, like that's kind of cool. It is a software feature, and that's the other big change with Galaxy S5 is a matured version of TouchWiz.
Yeah, which I'm surprised that they didn't choose to totally rebrand away from TouchWiz or.
Well, did they actually call it TouchWiz in the presentation?
I saw I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called. I mean, we heard the word glam a lot, so maybe it's like GlamWiz or TouchGlam.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's very different, and there are parts of it that don't look like Android at all.
Well, so that you bring up an interesting point. You rebooted the device, and on the splash screen, it's Samsung Galaxy S5 powered by Android.
Yes. And I immediately said as opposed to powered by Tizen.
Yes, because that's the evolution of Maemo, Moblin, Migo. That whole chain of open source OSs ended up under Samsung jurisdiction with Tizen. And we were looking through the settings screen, and the settings screen has all of the same things that you do with stock Android, but it looks like Migo.
Yeah,
right?
I spend a lot of time on the settings screen because that kind of like has all the elements that normally define a visual style.
Yeah.
Like their toggles, of course, like what the list drop down looks like.
Yeah.
Samsung has been through many iterations of that, with both the stock like long list and then tabs, and now it's kind of like a long list that's sort of paginated.
Yes.
And they have little icons. And that's kind of the visual style everywhere. That and the menu button is gone. The menu button is gone, and now it's a multitasking button. So you have that. Google finally was able to get Samsung to kill that off. So now it's action overflow.
Thoughts on the software UX?
I think it's better than the years previous.
Yeah,
it's better
I
than
think so
TouchWiz.
too.
I'm positive about it. It looks great. Gone is the Android 2.3 green, which used to amazingly still be around.
Yep.
I think the font looks a lot better. Actually, Ian was saying the font looks like the Intel font.
Oh, really?
Like he was like, I think it's the same font. And I was like, I think it might be. It looks really close.
Yeah.
So I mean, who knows? But yeah, UI changes are kind of superficial.
Yes.
In some cases, they're secondary to how the device actually works.
Yeah.
But I hate to give assessments based on, I saw it for an hour.
Yeah.
And here's the be all end all.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't get the opportunity to do it beforehand.
Yes.
So I would say wait and see. But obviously, again, they addressed, probably the biggest criticism, which was, it's the same thing over and over again on the UI side.
Yeah.
With very little evolution. I mean, to their credit, it's totally different now.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is you look at the Galaxy S4 launch, very, very heavy on, hey, this is all the new software stuff we do, right?
Yeah.
The iScroll and all that.
And the wave.
And the waving thing. And you look at the Galaxy S5 launch, and it's far less of that. All that stuff is like...
They have the heartbeat sensor, though.
Yeah, they do have the heartbeat sensor. There's that kind of stuff in there, but the messaging is a lot more polished, a lot more focused, and dramatically simplified compared to where they were. And so I think that I'm very appreciative of that step.
Yeah. No, me too. I mean, they did deliver on that part of it. But I mean, the features that are immediately marketable are still there, like the fingerprint sensor. Obviously the heartbeat sensor as well. All those sort of things you need to have now checked off.
Yeah.
Obviously the heartbeat sensor is a new one.
Yeah.
But
and so that's hilarious. We tried the heartbeat sensor, which is if you flip it around, you got the rear camera, you got the flash, you have basically effectively another camera.
Yes.
And like an LED.
Yes.
And you just hold your finger on there, don't press too hard, and it gives you a pulse reading.
Yes.
And so Brian goes up and puts his finger on there, and it's like he had just gotten done doing like stair climbs for 30 minutes because it was telling you had like your heart rate was like 121 beats per minute, and we're literally just standing there. We've moved maybe like 15 feet. So either
I was excited though, clearly.
It's interesting that
then it varied a little bit to like 90 and then back up to 120 and
and for me it was always like around 80, 90ish.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I don't know. I didn't have like I tried to take my pulse at the same time, but I wasn't timing it.
Yeah.
And that's for me. It's interesting that fitness is beginning to be a thing that these folks are caring about. But I don't necessarily know that that's what I'm looking for in a device. I just want the device to basically act as a good pedometer, and that's it.
Yeah, I want the heart sensor on my watch or something.
Yes.
I don't necessarily want it on the phone.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's cool that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I'll take it. Yeah. Why not? The fingerprint sensor is interesting too. I mean, I found that it worked fine. I mean, we programmed in a finger.
Yeah.
Read it back, no problem. The issue is that it's weird to do it because it's at the very bottom.
Yeah.
If you're just trying to do it one-handed.
Yes. I think Apple did a good job with that, right? The unlock
it's in the right place, and you don't need to swipe your finger across it.
Why do you think they opted for the swipe?
Because they don't have a touch and hold, or the button isn't big enough.
Yeah, because I feel like you can I feel like you can retain that chassis, and stick with that dimension of home button. But in order to do that, you have to do the swipe.
It seems like the same exact profile home button.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Like I agree with you. The when I saw you do it and just gliding my finger over it seemed like
fine.
It was all right.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been kind of vocal in the past about this. Are you glad to see them do that, or would you rather?
I think it would be very telling to see what percentage of users actually use it. I would say the positioning is actually better on the HTC One Max.
Really? Do you use it on the 5S?
On the back, yeah, all the time.
So
5S.
are you
but I mean,
sold?
It's transparent there. You just use it.
Yeah.
Because why not?
But are you sold that if I took it away from you, you would no longer?
No,
be...
I just put in my code.
Would you be upset if I took it away from you?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I have it now.
Yeah.
I will say when try to use the 5C, that putting in the code is immediately jarring.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think obviously for Android users that aren't used to it, there isn't that expectation yet.
Yeah.
And
but touch and hold is the way to go.
I would say the One Max is still in a better place. Like unless
for one-handed operation,
you can at least do it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's no way you can one-hand it on S5.
Yeah.
You need two hands.
Yeah. But I feel like maybe it's low-hanging fruit, right? Folks who want it, checkbox feature. Hey, we have it, and
that's exactly.
It's
what
an
it
easy
is.
way to sell it in the store. So Galaxy S5 it launches in almost 150 countries on April 11th. Hopefully in about a month we'll
And they announced an Exynos version sort of today.
Yes, yeah. They haven't provided details, but it's an octa-core version. 4+4, you can guess it's A7 plus A15s. The A15 clock speed goes up to 2.1 gigahertz now, which is like, I want that version even less now than I did before. Yeah. And so we'll be talking to Samsung and hopefully get some more details on what that SoC looks like. We've got to go and cover the rest of the show now. I want to thank you guys for watching. I want to thank Intel and Intel Studios for filming this thing. And definitely thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for checking out the site. We'll have MWC coverage throughout the rest of the week.
Thank you.